Thank you to Kanishka at 40, the group, all the 18 or 19 grassroots organizations in and around British Columbia and Vancouver for joining together to put this commemoration together. And they brought me back to Vancouver after 20 years. Painful reminder of what I came here last time for, and that was the trial in 2005. Horror and shock. So, 14,660. That's the number of days ago that the terrorist bombs originating from Vancouver blew up Air India 182 Kanishka, orphaned me at 17, killing my entire family of my father, my mother, and my baby sister. Those two bombs planted by Babar Khalsa extremists claimed 331 lives, including 134 children, 84 of whom were under the age of 12, as Lata has just mentioned. Ironically, that was a flight I should have been on. I was a 17-year-old kid, but fate decreed otherwise. I failed my 12th standard 2 days before that, and I stayed back to complete a re-examination and a re-evaluation. Who knows what would have happened had I passed? Little did I know that that night when I said goodbye to my family, that was the last time that I would ever say goodbye to them. That was the last time I would ever tell them that I loved them. And 12 days later, I got a call from my sister's godfather, to say that, my dad wanted me to come to London. Now, I was a young kid partying, and I thought, my dad thinks, I've probably done something wrong, so I went across there. But I took off from Bombay to London, and I didn't know what had happened. That night in London, I landed, and we stayed at a hotel called the Heathrow Penta. It abuts the Heathrow runway. And for those who were there, some families, and lots of my fellow journeyman families are here. Some stayed with us, some didn't. But that night at 3 in the morning, we were woken up, there was a bomb in the hotel. And it was allegedly the same group that had taken responsibility for the bombing the previous day. We evacuated the hotel at 3 in the morning, and we didn't get back till, 8 in the morning after the bomb squad had come in and checked the whole hotel out. That was in the cold rain, and I will not forget that day. We ran back to the hotel, boarded the aircraft to Cork, Ireland, and then began our search for the families, began our search for the bodies that were, lost. We spent every waking moment in Cork, in the hospital, where the part of the hall had become a massive morgue. The dimensions of this massive tragedy were bigger than anyone had ever imagined, and slowly became apparent to us. The process of searching and identifying family members fished out of the Atlantic is something I would not wish on any person, let alone a 17-year-old kid orphaned by the deadliest terrorist action in history. It was Canada's 9/11 before 9/11 had ever happened. We waited daily for the ships to come to shore, and I know a lot of my family members here will remember those days, and the helicopters to land with the bodies and body parts, secure in the knowledge that each day they did, we all would have more grief to address. During our first days, there was still some hope that maybe some had survived. I know I lived in that hope. But it was that famous photo wall in the hospital. There was a dark wall on one side where we had all these photographs of bodies and body parts and people that came out, and believe me, it was traumatic. It was that photo wall in the hospital that told us the brutal truth. It was the wail of tears in the valley of darkness that we had entered, and we lived in each day that we were there. Family members who came to view it broke down, cried, many collapsed and fainted, looking at the pictures of their loved ones, and some of them selected people who they appeared to be theirs, only to find out that they'd misidentified. Many families had to be treated for grief and ailments in that very hospital where they were looking for their own loved ones. I was not so lucky, as I had nowhere else to go, so I spent almost all day in those hospitals, in that hospital morgue, looking at the board every day. I would sit in the canteen or with the guard who looked after me. And so I was battered and drained emotionally as a kid by the horrors of this tragedy. I had become, impervious to human emotion. Something inside me broke that day and has not been repaired for 40 years. I lost my sanity, my humanity, my sense of compassion. I struggled from then on to identify my family. I spent about 24 days in Cork. I misidentified my baby sister. We went through the entire Interpol process, and I was about to fly out with a body that I thought was my baby sister, who was very, very dear to me. We had almost an 11-year age gap. And, people would see the Cabbage Patch doll image all across the world, and that was my sister's. So we misidentified that body, and that night before we left, another family told me that that was their body, and it was just traumatic to have to give up somebody you thought was, and this shows you how hopeless we were as families, because identifying a family member to take home became the greatest part of your life during that time. Identifying a dead one. The Navy called off the search, and I returned broken-hearted to London, and was to fly back to India the next day. When I was called up from Ireland, and they left a message in the hotel, it again was the Heathrow Penta, and I flew back. After they called off the search, one body had floated up because she was pregnant. My mother's body came up, and I flew back to Ireland. We identified it positively, and it turned out to be her. And then, that was, like I said, a moment of joy. A moment of joy because at least I had something to take home symbolically. Death and I have been old familiar friends, going back almost half a century, given the amount of family members and friends I've lost, starting with my brother and then, of course, this tragic accident or bombing. I lost my soul that day in Cork, and from then on began my struggle in life on various fronts. As an orphan, fighting for my house, my property, a whole lot of things, which, normally we hear of in other families. It impacted me beyond words. It took me 37, 38 years to realize that I didn't know how to mourn. I didn't know how to cry. I became, I linked up Mark Stagg and Danny Brown were two first responders, young men who were on the Laurentian Forest, a Canadian ship ironically traveling from London to Canada with newsprint, and they were the first on the scene. And I listened to, stories from them. I listened to their testimony before the John Major inquiry, and I realized how tragically it has affected people who were not even part of that tragedy. They had no family there. But for both of these gentlemen and many other first responders, they jumped into the sea to shark-infested waters to pull out bodies which they thought would be alive, and they still don't sleep today, 40 years down the line. 80-year-old Bobby Brown, who was on the ship Pongstein, 100 miles away from the Laurentian Forest, still gets emotional when he talks to me. He comes every year to Ireland for the anniversary. And, it shows you that this tragedy has transcended people, religion, race, and countries. And it's something that, makes me wonder about the depravity of men that would do something so vile. To many who did not know, not all the deaths on the Air India 182 Kanishka were swift and painless, as we are led to believe. A few died on hitting the water. I'm sorry if this sounds, but these are truths that I've discovered through a lot of research, and I would want to put it out there so people realize the breadth of this tragedy. And I pray that no one ever feel that pain. To give you a sense of the devastation, the aircraft debris was strewn over 100 square miles. And the distance between the Laurentian Forest and the Pongstein was 100 miles in radius. So you can understand the spread of the thing. As families, we were, I think Ujwalji has said and Lataji has said before me, so I won't dwell too much in that. But as families, we were ignored by governments of all countries, Kushal also has mentioned, isolated in a cocoon of ignorance. Even today, we have radicals who want to change the narrative, and this despite a $150 million trial and a public inquiry in a $7.5 million courtroom, which is not too far from here, where I remember coming for the trial. It took 15 years for the RCMP to even file charges. Let that sink in. 15 years. And then in that case, and I remember Crown coming to India, to Bombay, where I met with them, we discussed strategy, and then that entire case evaporated in a flash in that courtroom in Vancouver. After 3 years, I attended some of those hearings. I know all our family members who were part of that tragedy attended those hearings, and I saw that time, we were robbed of justice, and our families died once again that day. As I came out, as a young 33-year-old lawyer, I screamed on TV, and this may be jarring today, but it was there that day. Had this been a plane full of white people, we would have got justice by the second year. I'd like to say that very clearly, without any compunction. I sat there in the courtroom, not 15 feet away from the two accused, who grinned from ear to ear, smirking at the fact that every single witness, evidence or fact that could have convicted them or implicated them was either dead, deleted, or erased. Dave here is here, Sardar Tara Singh here. His own affidavit was on record, but he was brutally assassinated and unfortunately could never even give testimony. We are honored to have Dave amongst us. Thank you, Dave. And such was the perversity of this investigation and the lack of protection of witnesses. Maybe that was the jungle that, Canada was in those days. I don't know if that was the society that we lived in. But it did not help that the good judge himself made some really critical errors and misstatements, which as a lawyer from India I could point out. The RCMP and the CSIS, like I said before and written in my book, the bungled the investigations pre-bombing and post-bombing. I think Ujwalji referred to the fact that we all knew it was coming 6 months in advance. He himself wrote 5 months in advance. And the fact that vital evidence, tape recordings, transcripts, witness statements, etc. were destroyed or people were murdered. It speaks to the shabby manner in which Canada distanced themselves from this tragedy. And in fact, this will shock you to know, for the first 6 months, Canada did not even want to admit that there was a bomb, and they have said so in record on the Justice Kirpal inquiry which took place in Delhi. The Canadian representative filed an affidavit to this effect. So many tales of horror came out during the John Major inquiry, yet so many more will never see the light of day, unless we educate our next generations about the horror of this terror. I have been coming to Canada over the years for almost 40 years, seeking justice for our Kanishka families. Had it not been for the madness of Muhammad Atta and Osama bin Laden in wanting to flatten New York on September 11th, the Kanishka case would not even have come to fruition in my view. It may be a controversial view, but I do believe that we would not have got the inquiry or anything after that. Without meaning to belittle the enormous tragedy of 9/11 that happened, and we all felt it so deeply, I want you to remember, 132 kids died in this bombing. 132, like Lata said, is a generation wiped out. It's a generation that will never see the light of day. This is the children of Kanishka that I said. On Air India 182, the bomb that killed 84 kids below the age of 12 and 132 under the age of 18. Amongst them, of course, Brinda and Aarti Pada, Sanjay Tulapati, Deepak Tulapati, John Chatlani remembers his kids, and his brother. I remember my baby sister Sandita, who was just 3.5. I could go on and on, and these are only few of the children who passed away in Kanishka. But you, Canada, and the world would never know them. They belong to a lost generation, and no one speaks about them anymore. Make no mistake, like Ujwalji said, Air India 182 is even today the world's largest aviation bombing in history. Largest aviation bombing. I hope we recognize that fact. It is also the largest bombing of children in a single aircraft terrorist accident. This began as a tragedy 40 years ago until I had an epiphany on the banks of the Atlantic meditating a few years back. Like the Emperor Kanishka himself, I heard my family's voices telling me that I had not done enough. And I had to go forth and spread the word. and tell their stories and the truth. And it has now become a mission for me. I travel the world educating people on the horrors of terrorism, not Kanishka alone, but all. I have a foundation I've set up. And these last few months alone, I've spoken in 8 cities across the world, with a lot more to go. My book, On Angel's Wings, deals with this tragedy and is the first of a trilogy. It's free on Kindle. I hope you download it and read. It talks of this tragedy. The next part will be out on the year end, and I've dealt with the facts that led up to this tragedy and the awful attacks in Delhi, the Sikh pogrom, plus this. And it's part of our lived heritage, whether we are Indian, Canadian, European, African, anything. Tragedy and killings and terrorism across the world affect each one of us in every country, regardless of what flag we fly. As I close, I would like to quote Canada's permanent ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, who incidentally also authored the first report on this tragedy. He spoke so eloquently this June in Ireland, and he said, "This was a Canadian bomb, make no mistake. This was a Canadian bomb made by some people in Canada, designed and placed on an aircraft from Canada, set to explode over Ireland, killing 331 people across 2 continents, 260 of them being Canadian." And he said this, at the 40th memorial. I thank him for that. I have, in my 40 years of aviation, seen a few air crashes and bombs. I've been on the first wave of a number of them because I was a union leader in Air India. I have seen and understood the anatomy of an air disaster, and I have smelt burning flesh, and I understand the pain that I've lived myself. I know what terrorism is about in all parts of the world. If we see it in October 7th, we see it in 9/11, we see it on the 23rd of June. The loss of families, colleagues, even in the 171 very recently, Air India 171 that went down, I lost friends and colleagues. And I have no words for their families. For my friends, brethren, and strangers who suffer attacks across the world, anywhere, I have cried with you and I have mourned with you each and every incident of terror. It pierces each one of our hearts so grievously. I have not come here to Vancouver to seek revenge or anger. I have come with love to restore this equilibrium. It's time we teach our children and future generations that terrorism and violence are not the answer. Why British Columbia? I had many people ask me. Because this was the epicenter, and we need to teach our kids and grandkids to live with each other in peace. We cannot be in denial and rewriting history all our lives. Let's remember that. That is why I seek justice and recognition of our tragedy. This is why I appeal, and I'm so pleased to see so many of elected representatives here of various levels. I seek justice and recognition of our tragedy, which is your tragedy. This is why I appeal to all of you to join me and all the families and this Kanishka at 40 group and everybody to institute a Kanishka Memorial Learning Centre in Canada, in this part of Canada. And this is not about any particular religion or caste or creed or nationality. We are all Canadians, you are all humans first. Whether you're Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Christian, we need to live together and teach future generations what terrorism is about and what we should abhor as a society. Okay? We educate people in the dangers of radicalism, the horrors of extremism, and give a people a glimpse of who these beautiful children of Canada and Kanishka were. Let us educate children of Canada to the dangers of terrorism through this learning center and make this tragedy a part of our school curriculum so that we may never allow our citizens and civilizations to be attacked or repeat these horrific again. Thank you.